hello and welcome. I'd like to introduce James and Louisa, who are going to be discussing technology and its role in agriculture today with myself, John Reade. So James, tell me a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, I'm an agricultural economist here at Harper Adams. My focus is on the economics of new technology in agriculture, and one of my specific roles at Harper is I'm the economist for the hands-free hectare team, and I figure out, okay, who's going to make money out of this, how is it going to work, who's going to benefit, and there's some exciting things going on.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Louisa?
Hi, I'm a lecturer in agronomy here at Harper Adams, with a background as a commercial agronomist, so working with farmers. So I've seen a lot of change working in that sector over the last sort of 25 years, and I'm now involved in teaching students about the sector and some of those changes that we've seen.
Thank you, Louisa. And I'm John Reade. I'm a lecturer in crop and weed science, and I certainly do find some of the technologies which we are seeing now very exciting from a weed management point of view. The three of us discussed before we started making this recording that through our lifetimes we've seen a lot of changes in agriculture, and many of those changes have involved technology. James, have you got an example of that you'd like to discuss?
Well, one of the best examples of robotics in agriculture is the use of milking robots, and the use is now approaching 25% of cows in Northern Europe being milked by robots. And it's interesting because most of those milking robots are on relatively small and medium-sized farms. They're not on the biggest farms because small farms and medium farms face labor challenges, and some of them decide that it's easier and less expensive to use the robots. And they often find that the cows like it better because then the cows can be milked when the cows want to be milked rather than when the humans are available. So it's had some unexpected benefits, and they've been on the market since the early 1990s. So we have some experience there.
That's very interesting. 25%. I think as a crops person, it surprises me that 25% of farms are using these. I have seen some in action, but that's a high number. Obviously, a great success. Louisa, within crops and within agronomy, has technology played a big role?
Yeah, it has. I think we forget that technology isn't new in the arable sector. Once upon a time, the plough was the latest technology. We're just perhaps talking about a different type of technology now. So over the last 50 years, we've seen a fourfold increase, for example, in wheat yields in the UK, and that's primarily due to technological advances in plant breeding.
Okay.
So we've seen an awful lot of advancement there, and then now we're looking at a lot of those crops. We've tended to treat very sort of homogeneously, treating whole fields, large blocks of land as essentially the same, and not taking account of the huge variability that there is in soil type and in sort of weed pests and disease outbreaks. So there's a lot of scope now and a lot of interest in sort of refining inputs and making them much more tailored to deal with problems on a smaller scale. And the benefit of that is some sort of cost saving, obviously, to the farmer in reducing inputs, but potentially also the reduction in inputs, the reduction in pesticide use and fertilizers could give us environmental gains.
Yes, I have seen, with regard to weed management, some amazing information on reduction in pesticide use if you'd use site-specific weed management, down to maybe 4% of what would be used if you're blanket spraying fields. So certainly there's some benefits there, not just for the user and for the money that they've been spent. Benefits for the environment. Do you see this, both of you? Benefits to the environment from the use of technology?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the arable sector, I've already suggested that there may be benefits if we are able to reduce inputs in the future. But already we can see the use of GPS or guidance systems on combines has reduced fuel usage by 10%. So we've already got good examples of environmental benefits, and hopefully more to come in the future.
Okay. One of the main types of robots that's being tested in Europe are mechanical weeding robots that eliminate the use of herbicides altogether by doing mechanical weeding. And in some cases where the weeds are particularly persistent, they'll use some herbicides, but just apply a few drops of the herbicide on the specific weed rather than doing a broadcast spray. So that very much eliminates or reduces the use of those chemicals.
Okay, so clearly there are some environmental benefits. We can come back to those later. Economics then, there's often people who say to me, this is all well and good, but technology is expensive. And I find farmers saying, well, I can't afford this technology. Is the price coming down for these kind of technologies now that they're being more used in a more widespread way?
It depends on the technology, of course, but if we look at, say, auto steer, at the very beginning, auto steer was quite expensive, but then versions came out that maybe cost a few £1,000s, depending on, of course, the accuracy required and so on. So like so many other technologies, like mobile phones and other technologies that we use every day, with mass production and widespread use, the cost comes down.
Okay, and that cost needs to be offset against the money that's being saved as well. We mustn't forget that if we're saving money on fertilizer, as Louisa mentioned, or on agrochemicals, then a few £1,000s can be offset against that. So I can see how that would work. Okay, so we can see that environmentally we've got lots of boxes ticked. Agronomically, from the point of view of crops, and for animal management, you mentioned animals, maybe animals being managed in a way which is better for the animals. They're less stressed. Are there social issues too that could be involved here? Does this mean we're going to be employing less people if we use more technology?
Well, on social issues, I think one of the important impacts of robotic milking is they found that farmers that use robotic milking participate more in their communities. So instead of being tied to a twice or three times a day milking schedule, they can participate in community events or family events. On the labor side, in the arable sector, it probably wouldn't make all that much difference, but it would require a different kind of worker. So with a different set of skills, because the reduction in labor in the arable sector occurred decades ago with the development of mechanical motorized technology, tractors and combines and so on. There may be a reduction in labor used in horticulture when we have robotics for harvesting and weeding and so on. But that's a sector where that has depended heavily on immigrant labor, and of course, because of immigration issues and because of the pandemic, hiring and getting those workers here has been a problem. And so it may help solve that particular labor problem.
Okay, and now Louisa, you and I are both heavily involved for many years in sort of arable or agronomy education. We've seen lots and lots of people through our doors, and we always think we like to know what they need to know to do their jobs, especially when we're teaching on basis courses, for instance. Do you think we're going to have to teach people different things? Are they still going to be able to need to identify weeds, pests and diseases?
Yeah, I think they certainly are, and actually some of those sort of, I mean, they aren't basic, but some of those sort of fundamental skills will actually be required more, and a good understanding of sort of life cycles and soil biology and things like that will actually be more important. I think just sort of going back as well to the labour point, that actually that in the sort of agronomy advice sector, that's almost been seen, sort of the use of technology has almost been seen as a threat actually to some of the sort of roles, such as an agronomist's role, who's been very much in the field, identifying problems. So there's been perhaps a reluctance to take up some of it because it's seen as a threat to the role. So I think you're right that actually we just need a different kind. It's a changing role, and we can facilitate training in that sort of different type of role. An agronomist used to be very much seen as sort of very hard working during the growing season, and there was little to do in sort of December, January time. But actually, a lot of that time now is spent gathering data and predicting problems. So I think there is there's a definite role, but it is a changed role to what we traditionally used to 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay, and I do think that we need to be driven to some extent by our learners, I think, because I mean, I'm sure you've experienced the same as I've experienced, that students, trainee agronomists who are turning up, and whereas I'm in the field with a weed guide, a book, which I still like to have a book in my hand, they're using apps to do this. They're using apps to measure green leaf area. They might be using apps to decide when pesticides should be applied. So they're bringing to us this technology as well, and as education providers, we can learn from them as to how we should be developing our courses. The organic sector, I was going to say, the organic sector, we've talked about pesticides and applications, and the organic sector tends to have a fairly high requirement for workforce compared to conventional sector, generally speaking. So could technology help the organic sector, or is this something which we are just looking at for artificial fertilizers and for agrochemical applications?
I think the robotics has great potential to create a boom in the organic sector, because it would reduce one of the main constraints, which, as you've mentioned, has been labor requirements. But there are other things that we might produce once labor is less of an issue. So there may be some heirloom varieties, for instance, that are difficult to mechanize, that we could produce again because they provide good taste or good nutrition. There may be some other plants, herbs, other things that we do. So I look at the robotics as more about creating entrepreneurial opportunities in rural areas that will in fact expand the possibilities for livelihoods there.
Okay, Louisa, you want to say about the organic sector?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been some good examples where we haven't been that successful with sort of biological controls on a field scale, but there's certainly some good examples of using drone technology and very targeted biological controls. So that's another sort of opportunity.
Thank you. And drones, certainly very interesting. It's something that we've seen in the last 20 years, going from something which wasn't really available to any of us to be something which people will be finding underneath their Christmas trees again this year. So drone technology has really come down. And I certainly hear of people that are getting drones. Students are telling me they're getting drones for agronomy, but then they're using them to check gutters, to check roofs, to do lots of other things as well. So these are multiple use technologies, aren't they? And it's as soon as you find multiple uses for a single piece of technology, then the outlay financially becomes less and less important, because the technology is doing more and more jobs. So that's really important to us. So the organic sector can be useful. James, you mentioned sort of autonomous machines, robots. Does this mean that we should be looking at technology getting smaller on the farm? Because we're often criticised for having very, very large tractors, which some people love because they're so big and so large, but they're causing soil compaction, they're causing damage. Are we going to be moving away from these massive machines, James?
There's a potential, especially in certain places like Britain, for using smaller equipment, which would adapt better to the smaller, irregularly shaped fields that are common here. And certainly the experience on the hands-free farm here at Harper suggests that has the possibility both for making field operations more efficient, as well as reducing the cost, because you're using smaller machines more intensively instead of this big heavy machine. And just from the economic standpoint, once you take the human being off the machine, there's very few reasons to have a large machine. The large machine was mainly a way to leverage the working time of one human being. But once one human being might be able to supervise several small robots, the size of that robot is no longer the issue, and it's a question of, okay, what works best from an engineering and agronomic point of view.
It's almost like going full circle, isn't it, and going back to having a yard full of horses. So actually, the role of the farmer was to feed and look after, those smaller machines, if you like.
It is like that. Or when I look back at old photos of Harper Adams, I find photos of people doing sugar beet weed management, where you were all hand hoeing rows. And there's some wonderful old photos of competitions from the 1920s and 30s, where you get, if you did the best job and the quickest job, you get a nice little shield. So, and we do have competitions for robots, of course, because we see often that people are having competitions who can build not just the fastest robot to weed, but the one that's most accurate as well. And it's getting a balance between the two. So maybe an end to the big machines. Maybe those big machines will be at Sunday shows like the steam engines are today. And that's where our students will have to go to see them, because we know that some of the students love the big machines. And so size of equipment might be shrinking. Why haven't we got all of this now then? Why haven't we got, what are the bottlenecks that we're facing that are the barriers to mean that we've got barriers to uptake? Why aren't we all using this technology now?
I think one of the big barriers has been sort of integration of systems. Certainly in the arable sector, we've had lots of competitors working on it, but not necessarily, it hasn't always been in their interest to work together. So integration of systems has certainly been an issue in the arable sector. And sort of trust and understanding, it takes a long time for that to be developed, and we can look back in history and see that with other innovations in agriculture. And sort of support and training, there hasn't necessarily been the expertise, and that's where there are a lot of opportunities in slightly different roles to what we've been used to develop the technology and to provide the support and training for that technology. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it has been seen as a threat to traditional roles, such as the agronomist. I think that is changing, and it is being taken on board now, but there has been an issue with that as well. I mean, I think it has huge potential, or it's been shown that in the arable sector there's potential to reduce inputs by up to about 50%, but actually the uptake of sort of decision support systems and tools has only been around about 10% up until sort of 5 years ago. I don't know how much that's changing now.
Okay, so lots of possibilities, maybe some distrust, and that tends to be maybe a human characteristic that we do tend to be a bit wary of new technologies when they come on board. James, do you see ways by which we could address that?
Well, I would add here to what Louisa said that a couple of the other constraints have been regulation, and so depending on how technology is regulated. So let's take spot spraying from drones, which is unknown in the United Kingdom because it's not allowed, has become very common in places like China and Brazil, which have regulated them in a different way. There's also sort of a business model kind of issue. If the technology is only designed for use in the big flat fields of North America or Australia, then it might not work quite as well here in Britain. If there's technology that's developed locally for British and Northern European conditions, then it's more likely to work. So the questions about developing trust and learning, developing the ability to use the technology, that can be enhanced and speeded up with education, with information, things like farmer field days and other kinds of on-farm tests. There's many techniques that have been developed out there, of course, all depending on having technology that's actually practical and profitable. It doesn't help to bring farmers things that they're not going to benefit from. But if they can benefit from it, given the chance, they will figure it out. That's my experience.
Okay, it's a very good point. And the point about technology being appropriate for the right region, the right sector, that's very important. I'm certainly aware of issues where I've known people that have gone into robotic milking where the technology has been developed for a particular breed of cow and doesn't suit a smaller breed of cow, for instance. So there does needs to be tailoring of the technology. So I think that we've actually found benefits for social benefits. James mentioned, you both mentioned economic benefits and environmental benefits as well. And Louisa, you certainly highlighted those. So there do seem to be lots of benefits from technology, and maybe the barriers are not as high as people see them as. Maybe the barriers are not as high. Maybe we look outside agriculture and just say how readily we all started using mobile phones, and how we now can't manage without them. I had to put mine on silence during this call because it's there all the time with me. And yet if someone had told me in pre-mobile phone days that I would have had something alongside me that could do all the things this phone could do, I either wouldn't have believed them or would have maybe been a bit distrusting. Thank you very much. Hello, welcome. If anybody's got any questions, we're here to answer questions for, I think we've got 6 minutes or so. So it's myself and James, which you hear. A lot of questions in the question and answer chat, and there's also our contact details have been put in there, so you can get in touch with us after if we run out of. I've mentioned in question and answer session. I just mentioned that we're live as well. And so if anybody's any questions, we found it interesting exercise in putting together our thoughts on what we were doing, and so it was good to talk for James to talk with Louisa and with myself. One of the key things I think with technology is about different people becoming involved, and that we need different sectors all working together: the engineers, the computer scientists, the economists, the agronomists. And this is something which is vitally important that we do use going forward. This collaboration is going to be what helps us to move forward. James, can you hear me? James, can you nod if you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent, James. And so, James, your input is a lot of your inputs about the economics, isn't it? And so you're having a look at economics. I've just any thoughts about? I'm just picking up a question now. Any thoughts about whether consumer appeal of hand-picked produce may change in the aftermath of COVID-19? That's a very good question, Derek, and it certainly might do. I mean, we have found ourselves in a very different situation where we are looking at what we touch, and we're thinking about door handles and bottles and fruits, maybe. So certainly that would be something that maybe people look at. I think, though, Derek, my view is that the robotic picking of fruits, vegetables, it's largely going to be driven by the lack of available people to do that. People's desires are not really to work in those fields, and so I think that's what will be driving it forward. James, and also I think you feel that as the technology rolls out, it might be that it's financially more viable to have robot machines rather than paying people to pick. Is that correct, James?
Yes, and especially if it's difficult to find that labor. But back to the original comment about concerns about hand-picked fruit and vegetables, we may be seeing something happen as happened with dairy. So if you go back several decades, cows were milked by hand. And then milking machines came along, which were still monitored by humans, but no human touched the milk. And at least in the United States, some dairies advertised that this was milk untouched by human hands, that no one had the chance to contaminate it. And so it was turned into a hygienic sort of benefit. And we may be seeing some of that, but I agree with you, John, that the driving factor will be economics, and especially economics of labor availability. But I do need to emphasize that with fruits and vegetables, there's a real engineering challenge. So my colleagues at Harper Engineering tell me that teaching a robot how to identify and pick a ripe strawberry without crushing it is a real challenge. Whereas in the grain and oilseed sector, which is mostly mechanical now, it's only a question of automating that mechanical process, which is somewhat easier. So we may, in fact, see some automation in oilseeds and grains before we see it in fruit and vegetables. And in fact, in the U.S., there's companies that are selling retrofit kits right now as we speak.
Right. Yeah. Yes, and that's meaning that people are not having to completely change everything they've got. They are able to adapt what they've already got, and that's going to be. I think that's more. If financially, it's probably more acceptable than telling somebody that they have to change absolutely all of their kits. And we have to look at, with adoption of this, we have to make it so that it is financially realistic for people to adopt if it's going to take place.
Certainly for a lot of arable farms, retrofit will be the transition mechanism. And especially the retrofit allows the tractor or the combine to also be operated manually. So for a long time to come on public roads, it's going to be necessary to have a human driver. The technology to do that reliably on a public road is further off than the technology to do that in a field, which is a somewhat simpler environment. So what you can envision is a tractor with a switch on it that says manual or automatic. And if you have it on the automatic setting, then the tractor does what it's programmed to do. And if it's manual, then the human being can then operate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've seen people in the chats talking about auto steer and how much they like this. And we can see how auto steer has become something that lots and lots of people use. And it's taking things a step at a time and moving forwards. I think both Louisa, yourself, James, and I felt that it was going to be hard for us to predict what we'd see in 10 years, because 10 years ago, we wouldn't have predicted what we've got now. And it's very exciting times to be alive. We shouldn't fear technology. We should just use it in a positive way. I think that's what we're looking towards.
And sometimes there's technology that comes along that people who didn't necessarily anticipate wanting it find it very useful. And I'll give you the example of auto steer. So yeah. I've met many older farmers who said, oh, my shoulder was starting to bother me and I couldn't operate that tractor those long days anymore. But now with auto steer, it's fine. I just, switch it on auto steer and, I can continue farming for another couple of years. So that wasn't the target audience, target customer, but it turns out to be an important group of people who benefited.
Absolutely, and as time goes on, there will be people that are entering the industry who will auto steer will have always been there, and so for the generations, it will be people that are just used to it and they see it as absolutely something that is just a part of the farming system.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, we were answering questions. I'm having a look at what questions are coming through. I just see Naomi saying the session will end soon, because I was looking at the time. I think Naomi is in charge of the session, so she's going to cut us off. But thank you very much for all of you that have joined us. I hope you found it interesting. I've certainly found the whole event very interesting so far, and there's all of the afternoon sessions to go. So I'm going to wish you very good sessions. Stay safe and healthy all. And if you have any further questions, you can contact James, myself, or Louisa via the Harper Adams website. Thank you.
Thank you very much.